The United States and the United Arab Emirates are setting up a bilateral working group to advance their shared agenda, accelerate progress toward global climate goals, and contribute to regional and global sustainable development. We're joined now by Hana Al Hashimi, the newly named director of the UAE Climate Envoy's office. Hana, it's great to see you. I assume you're not like in Alexandria, Virginia or something. You're like way over in Abu Dhabi right now. Am I right?
Warm wishes from Dubai, Steve. It's a pleasure.
Oh, Dubai. Excuse me. I got it wrong. Well, love Dubai, too. Listen, I think that one of the things is really interesting to me is the world is going to be coming together in November for the next round of UN climate talks. The UAE has been such a powerhouse nation when it came to being a strategic, basically a vital strategic asset in oil and gas. How do you think about the UAE becoming a strategic asset when it comes to renewables and to the climate change challenge?
Well, that's a great question, Steve, and thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join you on the show. Unequivocally, climate change is the defining issue of our time, and it requires a proportionate response. In the UAE, we focus very much on possibilities for the future. And we are convinced that climate action is not a burden, but an opportunity. That outlook is part of this intense, perhaps, obsession of our country towards innovation and future readiness. And as noted recently, actually, by our Prime Minister, when reflecting on our 50-year history as a nation, the vision that formed us from the desert just 50 years ago has brought happiness and prosperity to our people and has taken us from our roots in the desert all the way to space with the launch of the Hope probe. So this basically is the bar that's set for us, really, from and our view from the Office of the Climate Envoy. So we're focusing very much on providing an ambitious set of options and partnerships for action, both at the macro political level and the sectoral level that address climate change while strengthening our economy, with, of course, COP26, as you mentioned, in Glasgow, as a key point and platform that we're aiming towards. And we're very happy to be working closely as the UAE with the US government, building on many years of strong bilateral ties to tackle the global climate challenge together. Our joint efforts will not only accelerate efforts to reach climate goals, will also enhance economic opportunities and diversification while creating knowledge, skills, and jobs. To focus perhaps on what we're doing within the UAE, we have four main angles of our work and where we think we can contribute to the global dialogue. Firstly, in greater investment and deployment of renewables. So building on the fact that we currently have the world's cheapest solar and have partnered with over 40 developing countries, particularly in the Caribbean and the Pacific, on renewable energy projects, looking at scaling that up moving forward. Second, decarbonizing our oil and gas even further. Because there is still going to be a demand for decades to come. So we need to make sure that it's as low carbon as possible. We already have the lowest carbon oil in the world, but carbon capture and solar power are making it even more competitive. And we're looking at hydrogen as a new low carbon revenue source, and are happy to hear the notes from the Senator on this as a potential way moving forward for the industry. The third would be research and development. So particularly looking at ultra low carbon food and water production coming from an arid region. And fourth, perhaps advocacy, making a very visible business case for climate action from the heart of the hydrocarbon industry. We're very keen to welcome the world to the UAE and yourself, Steve, right. Absolutely anytime, and offer strong platforms for dialogue in the coming years. So basically, just to wrap up and address the question, this isn't something that's new for our country. We've been working on this for 15 years and have been at the forefront of implementing groundbreaking renewable energy programs, and looking forward to working with our partners moving forward as well.
That is a terrific, comprehensive answer, because, isn't it interesting? And, a lot of our viewers, know the UAE for a certain role, but, I helped moderate with your ambassador here in Washington a session on the Mars probe and others. So science and technology that you've worked on have made a real difference. But let me ask you another thing. I often use these shows as ways to sort of talk about show and tell, because what the UAE is doing, which is standout, for you're in Dubai, the world's largest solar, really the solar park is in Dubai. And you have a city you're building, which Masdar City is going to be the region's first carbon neutral zero waste city. These are things that rich nations can do. but they become important if they're really about R&D and then finding replicable things that other parts of the world can do. So have you thought through a little bit, as you develop the cheapest solar power in the world, as you do these different things, what can be transported to Latin America, to developing parts of the world that may not have the resource base that the UAE does?
Absolutely, Steve. I think that's integral to our development philosophy and model. We're a small country, a young country, and we very much recognize that that old adage that says that if you go alone, you go slow, but if you go together, you go further.
That's about right. Steve Case uses that little thing in all of his books, and I keep thinking he invented it. But but go ahead.
If you go alone, you go fast. If you go together, you go far. I think we very much believe that, and that was core to our bid to host actually the International Renewable Energy Agency, and we've been very proud to welcome 184 member countries really to the country in order to set the renewable energy agenda moving forward. As part of that, we also launched a fund for the Caribbean and the Pacific that has looked into developing solar capacities over there. In many developing countries, Steve, it's not just a question of clean energy, but a question of access. Which empowers entire communities and individuals. And if you just think about, the access to electricity that can allow kids to study in the dark, that can allow, industries to grow in a community and bring more opportunities to people. These are really the kinds of empowerment that we want to continue to push forward. Maybe to give you a couple of concrete examples, we've created Masdar already 15 years ago. You mentioned the first zero carbon city in the region, and it now has a solar and wind parks in locations as diverse as the US, the UK, Uzbekistan, and Oman, as well as several other developing countries. We've brought about $1 billion in foreign aid projects for renewable energy in about 40 countries. And we have a group of very exciting projects where, that includes looking at building back better in the Caribbean. So very much looking forward to continuing really to deploy this and working with countries moving forward.
Hana, we have a question. It's an interesting one from an intern in Senator Chris Coons' office from Ben Olarsh. And can renewable energy be used as a peace-building opportunity in the Middle East? You have the Abraham Accords, and that's very important. But how can a track like renewable energy options or climate or technology sharing, enhance some of what's going on in the Middle East right now?
That's a great question. Thank you very much. I think it's hard to answer it without addressing the question of climate security. I think it's important to note that very much that climate change undermines peace and security, and that applies very much in the region. There is a lot of ideological noise, but when we look at the personal level, and a person that's in a fragile country in a difficult situation, that are already losing their resources and jobs because of droughts, floods, and other disasters, there's going to be problems. So for the MENA specifically, there are many countries that are already arid, that have long histories of conflict and instability, and are already experiencing much harsher weather than in the past. I'm talking about the Sahel, Yemen, the Horn of Africa. That's where we're really seeing amplifying insecurity. So to answer the question, it's not just about the deployment of renewables is also about providing climate resilient technologies in some ways to ensure that these communities are able to remain online, to remain powered through these situations, but that we also have to deal with the adaptation and mitigation efforts to avoid fueling further instability across the region. I think there's great potential, and that in the other aspect that I think we should touch on in addition to energies certainly is agriculture technology, sort of efficient use of water as well, given the aridness of the region. And these are some of the topics that we really want to bring to the top of the political agenda, particularly as we look at our Security Council position.
Hana, can you give me, just in final, a 30-second dummy's guide to blue hydrogen?
Well, that's a great question. It's something I'm learning about absolutely myself.
Maybe we both need it. No, I know that blue hydrogen is a big innovation that UAE is working on. But I've heard about it, that when it burns, its repository is water, as I understand it. So have been talking to General Electric and others about the promise of hydrogen and others, and so just wonder what the UAE's stakes in this are. And I may have asked you a surprise question. My apologies.
No, they're absolutely welcome. This is a great discussion so far, Steve. Thank you so much for that. So blue hydrogen specifically, my understanding is that this is a way to use natural gas with carbon capture in order to produce sort of zero carbon fuel for heavy industries and transport. So there's a lot of potential. When we're looking at emissions, there's about a quarter of global emissions that come from the transport industry. A lot of that is from heavy industry, your trucks, et cetera. So when we look at alternative fuel sources, this could be potentially a game changer. It's absolutely an area of priority that we're looking at developing. It's an area, in addition to carbon capture and storage, that we're looking at deploying further domestically. And actually, just in January, we launched the Abu Dhabi Hydrogen Alliance, where we're looking at advancing low carbon, both green and blue hydrogen in emerging international markets, and hope to build that economy. The reality, though, Steve, is that this is very much an area under development. Part of the answer will depend on having markets that are ready to already use the energy as it becomes available. So there's a lot of technology still to be developed, and it's an exciting space to continue to work on moving forward.
Well, Hana Al Hashimi of the Office of the UAE Climate Envoy, I look forward to, you should come back, because I think this is one, as Sheldon Whitehouse said, this is one of the most important issues where it's not just something anymore we just have to check off the box and say, okay, we're doing climate friendly things over here on Sunday afternoons, but we are actually trying to sort of embed this more deeply. And it's very clear to me that this is a priority for you. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve. Thank you. And thanks to all the viewers as well.